if there were peaceful protests on Saturday for the military parade, President Trump would allow that?
Of course the president supports peaceful protests. What a stupid question.
In a scene that quickly made its way across cable news and social media, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt stood behind the iconic blue podium and delivered a moment of raw confrontation. Her words, "That's a stupid question," directed at a seasoned reporter, didn't just echo in the room. They ignited a firestorm across journalistic circles, reigniting old tensions between the press and the presidency. But this wasn't an isolated gaffe or a misstep. It was the culmination of weeks of growing hostility, strategic messaging, and a carefully choreographed media war brewing behind the scenes. Karoline Leavitt's rise to national prominence has been anything but conventional. At just 27 years old, she became the youngest White House press secretary in modern American history. A former aide to President Trump and a well-known face within conservative media circles, Leavitt was already familiar with the intricacies of political communication and ideological warfare before stepping into her current role. Her appointment was hailed by the right as a sign of youthful resurgence and ideological commitment. But for many in the mainstream press, it marked the beginning of what they feared would be an era of intensified media antagonism. Unlike her predecessors, Leavitt brought with her a digital native mindset, sharp rhetorical instincts, and an unapologetically combative posture, traits that would soon redefine the nature of daily press briefings in the White House. Historically, the relationship between the White House and the press corps has been fraught but navigable. From FDR's fireside chats to JFK's charismatic briefings, and even during Nixon's strained exchanges with reporters, a delicate balance of accountability and decorum was maintained. The briefing room, while politically charged, remained a forum for professional discourse. However, in the post-2016 era, particularly under President Trump, the tone changed dramatically. Accusations of fake news, the marginalization of certain outlets, and viral sparring matches became standard fare. This antagonism did not end with the Trump administration. It merely evolved. President Biden's team attempted to restore civility through figures like Jen Psaki and Karine Jean-Pierre. But Karoline Leavitt's entrance marked a return to high-stakes media combat, this time with greater sophistication and intent. By the time Leavitt assumed the role in early 2025, the political landscape had shifted once again. President Trump's return to power in the 2024 election against a divided and demoralized Democratic opposition sent shockwaves through the American political establishment. With it came a renewed effort to reset the administration's tone on media engagement. Leavitt was not merely brought in to field questions, she was deployed as a strategic communicator, chosen specifically for her ability to dominate narratives, discredit adversaries, and project unwavering strength. Her briefings became more than updates. They were battlegrounds. Audiences tuned in not just for information, but for confrontation. And that confrontation reached its peak when Leavitt dismissed a reporter's question as stupid, a word rarely heard from behind the official podium, let alone directed at a veteran journalist with decades in the briefing room. The moment that would come to define Karoline Leavitt's media strategy unfolded during a routine White House press briefing on a Monday afternoon in June 2025. The room was packed, the atmosphere tense, and the media fully alert after a weekend of nationwide protests related to the administration's new executive order on civil unrest. As the questions turned toward the legality and constitutionality of federal troop deployments in Los Angeles, veteran correspondent Margaret Ellis from the Associated Press rose to ask a pointed and detailed question about the potential violation of First Amendment rights. Ellis, known for her composure and thoroughness, posed a scenario in which peaceful protesters were reportedly detained alongside violent actors, a question grounded in both legal precedent and emerging field reports. Without hesitation, Leavitt leaned into the microphone, narrowed her eyes, and responded with unmistakable sharpness. "That's a stupid question." A beat of silence followed, then gasps. The room fell into an uneasy hush as journalists exchanged glances, some stunned, others grimly amused. It was not the first time Leavitt had employed sarcasm or cutting language during her tenure, but this moment marked a clear escalation. Unlike previous instances where political opponents were the targets of her rhetoric, this was a direct dismissal of the press's role as a watchdog, a principle deeply embedded in American democracy. Her delivery was not flustered nor accidental. On the contrary, she maintained eye contact, followed the statement with a half smile, and proceeded to the next question without pause. The message was deliberate. Leavitt was asserting control not only over the podium, but also over the very terms of engagement. In the hours that followed, major networks like CNN and MSNBC aired extended segments dissecting the exchange, while Fox News praised her poise under pressure. Social media exploded with divided reactions. Leavitt meltdown and Sartre press power trended simultaneously, a microcosm of the polarized media environment in which the incident had instantly become both symbol and battlefield, but the confrontation did not end there. The following day, reporters attempted to circle back to Ellis's question, reframing it and reintroducing it through other outlets. Leavitt, however, doubled down. She opened the briefing with a clipped monologue about media sensationalism and the need for fact-based, security-conscious reporting. At one point, she held up what she called incomplete and dishonest headlines from several outlets, including the AP, as examples of how the press manufactures outrage. For her critics, it was a chilling moment, reminiscent of authoritarian regimes that seek to discredit the Fourth Estate. For her supporters, it was a brave and necessary stand against a media apparatus they view as fundamentally biased. The administration notably did not walk back her language. In fact, President Trump retweeted a clip of the briefing with the caption, "Perfect answer. No time for dumb media games." This endorsement confirmed what many suspected. Leavitt's rhetorical aggression was not a misstep. It was a sanctioned strategy. The response to Karoline Leavitt's "stupid question" comment was immediate. Polarized and emblematic of the broader cultural divide between government and media in 2025. From within the White House press corps, the backlash was swift. Margaret Ellis, the seasoned AP journalist on the receiving end of Leavitt's remark, issued a measured but firm statement. The role of the press is to ask difficult questions. The role of the government is to answer them, not avoid them. Her words were quickly echoed by the White House Correspondents Association, which released an official condemnation stating that dismissing legitimate journalistic inquiry as stupid undermines the constitutional principle of a free and independent press. CNN's Jake Tapper described the incident as a calculated attack not just on a reporter, but on the institution of journalism itself. Even reporters from traditionally right-leaning outlets expressed unease in private, fearing that Leavitt's tone could further erode the fragile lines of professional respect that maintain press-room integrity, especially in an era of rampant disinformation. However, the administration's base and conservative media allies quickly mobilized in defense of Leavitt. Fox News ran a primetime segment titled "Media Throws a Tantrum Over Simple Truth," framing the episode as an overdue pushback against mainstream media arrogance. On social platforms like Truth Social, X, and Rumble, clips of Leavitt's comment were reposted with captions like, "Finally, someone says what we're all thinking, and stupid questions get stupid answers." Former Trump advisor Stephen Miller praised Leavitt's discipline and control under enemy fire, while Turning Point USA's Charlie Kirk called it the most honest moment in the briefing room in a decade. Within 48 hours, conservative PACs were fundraising off of the moment, printing Leavitt's quote on mugs, T-shirts, and digital banners. Meanwhile, the Biden-aligned media landscape doubled down, using the moment to discuss a broader, chilling effect on the press and to draw parallels to past moments of government hostility toward journalism, particularly during the Nixon and Bush administrations. The narrative had officially split into two separate realities. Experts in political communication and constitutional law have weighed in heavily on the implications of Leavitt's confrontational stance, particularly as it relates to democratic norms and press freedom. Dr. Marianne Holt, a professor of journalism ethics at Columbia University, noted that dismissing legitimate journalistic inquiry as stupid doesn't just insult the individual, it signals a broader institutional disregard for transparency. "The press is not supposed to be comfortable," she remarked in a recent interview. But when you see a government figure publicly discrediting not the content but the question itself, it becomes a form of narrative control, intended to delegitimize critique before it can even be articulated. Other scholars, like Dr. Imran Ghazi at Stanford Law, drew parallels between this moment and historical instances where authoritarian tendencies began with language policing in public discourse. "The concern isn't just about one word," he said. It's about a systematic attempt to frame journalistic inquiry as antagonism, thereby justifying its suppression. In this context, Leavitt's briefing was less about defending policy and more about asserting ideological authority. Political strategists, meanwhile, see Leavitt's behavior as part of a broader tactical shift in how the Trump administration engages with the media. Unlike previous communications teams that sought to defend policies through facts and spin, Leavitt's strategy appears to be disruption and reframing. Instead of correcting or clarifying, she preempts critique by attacking the legitimacy of the question itself, a maneuver that neutralizes the press in real time. Veteran GOP media consultant Dan Carrington explained, "The idea is to recast the media not as observers or referees, but as players, biased players. Once you do that, every confrontation becomes a political win, not a liability." This approach mirrors populist tactics used internationally, from Viktor Orban in Hungary to Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, where press briefings become performances meant to energize a base rather than inform a public. In this new paradigm, outrage from journalists is not a warning sign, it's a metric of success. Every negative headline becomes a badge of honor, evidence that the spokesperson is doing battle on behalf of the administration's supporters. Looking toward the long-term implications, the normalization of open hostility between the executive branch and the press corps could have serious consequences. Analysts warn that continued delegitimization of journalism risks further eroding public trust in democratic institutions. Already, data from Pew Research indicates that trust in mainstream media has fallen below 30% among Republicans and independents. If the White House itself reinforces the idea that questions from journalists are inherently biased or stupid, it creates an information vacuum, one that is often filled by social media speculation, partisan echo chambers, and conspiracy-driven narratives. Moreover, this climate discourages younger journalists from entering the field and may lead to increased self-censorship among those who do. The more hostile the space, the fewer questions get asked, warns Dr. Holt, and when fewer questions are asked, more bad policy goes unchecked. In the short term, Leavitt may succeed in dominating the headlines and reinforcing the administration's narrative. But in the long term, the cost may be measured not in polls or sound bites, but in the weakening of democratic accountability itself. Karoline Leavitt's explosive moment at the White House podium was more than a fleeting gaffe. It was a deliberate flashpoint in a larger political strategy. Whether seen as strength or subversion, her words reflect a deepening fracture between power and the press in America's democracy. If this moment made you pause, whether in concern, agreement, or shock, then the story isn't over. How we respond to these confrontations shapes not just tomorrow's headlines, but the future of press freedom and political accountability. Subscribe to the channel for more in-depth coverage of today's most critical issues. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Is Leavitt defending truth or deflecting it? And don't forget to like and share this video if you believe in keeping power in check through real journalism.